So, welcome to my talk. It's Where's My Drupal to English Phrasebook? Understanding Drupal Jargon. My name is Paul Schulzetenberg. I'm Director of Engineering for Origin 8, and I also freelance a bit. The Director of Engineering thing, it's basically, I do a lot of development. I also do a lot of content modeling and a lot of suggestions for clients and other people about like, well, this is kind of how my business works. How does that mean that my web presence should look? And so that's me. You can see some other stuff. The Prezi logo looks like it's hiding one of my things, but that says Drupal.org. That's my Drupal.org name. And that's my email and my Twitter account. So why this presentation? Well, like I said, I do this a lot. Like, I do a lot of explaining terminology to people who aren't necessarily familiar with it. So I figured that seems like an easy thing to do. And I remember when I first learned Drupal, yeah, it was pretty hard. I mean, that was a while ago now, but I still remember it. So it must, like, when it's still like 5 years later and you kind of remember the like cracking head open trauma of like trying to learn a new platform, you tend to remember it. And so I'm hoping that I can ease the learning curve for a few other people. And then finally, last year's attendees asked for more intro sessions. So I'm like, well, I think I can do an intro session. So that's why I'm here. So why are you here? Well, you want to know what the heck your developer is talking about. He keeps using all this stuff. He keeps saying these words that maybe you don't know. Or maybe you are a developer and you know other platforms, but Drupal is weird and scary. And you know, like you're just like, I just want to go back to Python. Django is so great. You know, or you figure that any session in the same room as a keynote must be good. And well, I hope I can help the first two. I don't know about the third. So anyway, I also wanted to give a lot of people a chance to ask a lot of very basic Drupal questions. And it's nice that they put me early because that means that you can go out and you can ask whatever is confusing you now, so that for the later sessions, you can go ahead and hopefully have some better stuff, better understanding. So, a few caveats. These definitions are extremely simplified. I'm sure that some of the people who know Drupal in this room will want to yell at me. They will shake their fists and want to come after me with pitchforks because I'm being too simple with these things, and this is not, it's so much more complex. It's also not exhaustive. I'm sorry, I could talk for the entirety of Friday and Saturday about Drupal terminology and probably not run out of new things to say. So don't think you're going to get everything. But most importantly, don't think that you need to get everything in this presentation to understand Drupal. This is a jargon talk. There's going to be a lot of stuff here. So if some of it's like, I don't know, okay, well, you kind of lost me like after the third slide. Hope is, you know, if you want to, you can stick with it. Hopefully we'll get some more later on. So, and again, questions for later. Remember them. So jargon, well, this French philosopher, yeah, there's going to be philosophy in this talk. This French philosopher said, he said something really smart and I liked it, so I'm stealing it. Every science requires a special language because every science has its own ideas. And I'm going to take the pretension of calling web development a science, at least for the duration of this talk. So, first I want to do an exercise, which I'm calling the rabbit hole. In a moment, I'm going to ask you all to raise your hands, and I'm going to start reading a list of terms. And I want you to put your hand down when you first hear a word that either you don't recognize or that you don't feel comfortable using in a sentence. Like you would be like, I don't really know how to say that, you know. So first, starting out with the general web terms, everybody raise your hands if you've heard of the internet. I'm hoping that's everybody. There's some people in the balcony that aren't raising their hands. I hope that's because they're working. HTML, CSS, web server, sorry, I missed one, JavaScript, database, PHP, CMS. Okay, almost everybody still has their hands up, so that means I'm going to blow through the first part of my presentation pretty quickly. Okay, sorry, put your hands back up. One more time, next set of words. This is the Drupal stuff. Content type. Okay, seeing some hands go down. Module, taxonomy, we're losing some more people. View, theme, Entity, tpl.php, or tipplefip. Drush, or whiskey. Yeah, okay, you guys who still have your hands up, this talk isn't for you. I hope you get lots of stuff from this, but if you knew what the whiskey initiative was, there's not going to be much here for you. In fact, like those last two words, I'm not even going to cover those. You can ask about them in the Q&A if you want to, like, I don't know, show off or something, but what I'll probably do is be like, hey, let's go grab coffee sometime and not waste all these nice people's time. So, all right. So the internet, right? Ted Stevens, the senator from Alaska, famously called it a series of tubes. And that's actually he was talking specifically about bandwidth, and there's actually a somewhat common definition that sort of revolves around that. It's not quite as crazy as it seems. It was still pretty crazy, and he butchered it pretty bad. So I'm going to try to explain the internet also, and I'm probably going to butcher it almost as bad. But hopefully I'm a professional, so I'll do it a tiny bit better. So my favorite definition is it's thousands of network computers that find each other based on publicly listed addresses. This stuff is all stuff that you guys know. Everybody kept their hands up here. I'm going to blow through this stuff pretty fast. HTML, you probably know. It's used for it's the language that's predominant on the web. DNS is how computers find each other. Web server is the physical box and also the software, which I'll get to in a minute, which responds to or responds to requests and feeds information out to the other stuff. So first of all, HTML. This is HTML. Remember this? Yay, HTML. Anybody know when this is? I don't know if you can see. It looks like the resolution is good enough. Anyone want to guess? I'll give you a hint. That Yahoo auctions. Yeah, if you guys are really interested in Pokemon, Beanie Babies, video games, or Furbies, this is where you go. You go to Yahoo. Anybody want to guess when it's from? Close. Little more recent. 2000. Close. So this is the Web Circuit 2000. It's all HTML. It looks like this. We came up with a lot of better stuff. CSS and JavaScript. JavaScript was around pretty early. CSS came around. It makes things look a lot nicer. JavaScript, and these continue to evolve. HTML5 and CSS3. These are things that are changing our understanding of the web. It's a little bit out of scope to talk about how they're doing so. Just know that they're there. Again, this is, for those of you who want to know what the heck your developer is talking about, this is for you. Okay, so back to that slide. Then, what's in most web servers? Web servers are basically, they're usually a physical box, although that's changing now that we have the cloud. But they're basically a collection of software. They have an operating system, they have a server, they have a database, they have a processor. Again, it seems like most people are relatively familiar with this, so I don't want to spend too long on it. The operating system is basically, you know what it is, it's on your PC. It's the same kind of idea on a web server. The web server in this context, does not mean the entirety of the box on which everything is based. It means specifically the software that is doing that says, I'm listening for something, something comes in, okay, I got to feed that person some information. The database, which basically stores information, it's somewhat analogous to a file system. It's got a lot more. I can already tell there's going to be screaming at this. It's somewhat analogous to a file system. It just makes things much easier to find and much more quick to access. Processor is basically something that says the server speaks one language, the database speaks another language. I need to take these two things and make them talk to each other. The server talks to me, then I talk to the database. The database talks back to me. I talk back to the server. And so that's the basic thing. These are often abbreviated to create acronyms. So the most common Drupal stack is up there. So the stack is the four pieces of software together. Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, or LAMP, LAMP. So that's something you're likely to hear. And then finally, what's a content management system? A content management system, or abbreviation of CMS, it's basically a way for non-technical users to maintain websites. It also allows complex data modeling, and it does many, many more things. But those are the sort of, 10-second definition. And the popular examples out there, Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, there's lots of others. And a lot of them are open source, including Drupal, which means basically that they're community built. Okay, so that's the basics of my terminology. Now we're going to get to the Drupal stuff. So Drupal has this reputation, which I think everybody can see that slide, but basically those bottom three are learning curves for other CMSs, and then there's Drupal, and you know, much wailing and gnashing of teeth happens when you get to Drupal. So why is it so hard? Well, when given a choice, Drupal picks flexibility. You know, they're like, I want to do this, and I want to be able to do this, and I want to be able to do this, and I want to be able to do this. I want to, like, Drupal at some level almost seems like it wants to eat the world. The Drupal community just wants to say, I want to serve every use case. And that's really cool. Like, that's ambitious, but it's also like, it opens up some really nice things. It's really easy to add new functionality. It means you're not programming for your needs now. It means you're not building your site for your needs now. You're building your site also for the needs that you're going to have later. You don't have to say, oh, I'm going to add this big new thing. Well, write a big thing, big old like black line in the budget that's going to say like, make sure we bold that one because we don't want to miss that one next year because it's going to be hard. It's a little bit easier than that. It also gets your data in one place. So if you have a sales team that's doing one thing, you got a production team that's doing one thing, you got an HR team that's doing one thing, you can kind of put them all sort of in one place. That's one of the advantages of flexibility. And then if you want to do it, you probably can, you know? It's not always the right choice to do it in Drupal. There's a lot of things that are definitely not the right choice to do in Drupal. But you often can do them. So there's a big but. Like, flexibility is good, but flexibility requires more jargon. It basically works this sequence up here. Flexibility means that we have to have a lot of abstraction because of those use cases that I was talking about. Like, I can't just sit there and say, well, it's going to be a product, because I don't know it's going to be a product. I don't know what it's going to be. Maybe it's going to be, you know, maybe I'm going to do something for this auditorium and I might, like, a chair isn't a product. A chair is a chair. So we have to kind of abstract things out, which sort of naturally leads to this sort of vagueness, which leads to jargon. This is why Drupal uses terms that are words you know with meanings you don't. Like these things. You know, this is where I started seeing hands be like, what, huh? They were dropping, and I don't blame you. It's because like these things mean completely different things in Drupal than they might mean in other platforms or, even ordinary talk. So this is what I like to call, you keep using that word, I do not think it means what you think it means. So over there on the right, that's the block view. That's a block view to the Drupal developer. But over there on the left, that's what probably, if you showed people this page, they'd probably be like, no, that's the block view, obviously. That's a city block, and that's like sort of looking at the city blocks. So that must be the block view. Well, block view, there's jargon. So that's why the other one is actually the block view to a Drupal developer. So now on to the actual Drupal jargon. And so this is going to be hard. So don't worry if you get lost. Again, there's going to be a big question and answer session, and I will happily talk much further about it. So, site building jargon. A module and a theme are two sort of basic ideas of Drupal. So Drupal is open source, which essentially means everybody can contribute to the project, which means everybody can write code. Everyone has, and modules and themes are sort of ways of packaging that code. A module, it basically makes your website do something. A theme, and then, again, simplifications. A theme is something that makes your site look different. And there's a lot of, both of them are really flexible and you can sort of bleed into each other. But that's the basic idea. There are also these three ideas, these sort of three concepts of how these modules and themes are sort of encapsulated. There's Drupal core, which if you go to the Drupal 7 website and you say download, or Drupal website, and you say download, it'll give you Drupal 7, it'll give you core. There will be no no customizations or anything to it, but that is the basic package of modules and themes. Like, so there are multiple modules and themes within Drupal core. It's not just like one. Drupal core is not its own module. Then we get to contrib, short for contributed code, or contributed module or contributed theme. And that's a module or theme that's been contributed by one or more members of the community for public use. So what that means is I say, well, this stuff that I'm doing for client A, that's pretty useful. And that can be very easily generalized. And not only might I want to use it for client B, but I think this is something that I can give back to the Drupal community to grow our ecosystem, our method of doing things. And I don't want to go too much into why open source, but basically that does several good things for us. It makes our whole platform better, which means it really keeps our ecosystem much healthier. And then there's custom stuff. This is when client A has a very specific need. I can't meet it with what's in the contrib space or what's in core, so I got to write something. This is the heavy lifting. This is sort of the 10%, the hard 10% of a project. You know, you can get 90% of a project done really easily, and then the 10% is really hard. But that 10% is often the most important and the most critical. So that a lot of the time, that 10% is done with things that are custom. And then finally, one that's sort of a different idea. A block is basically something on your web page that's going to show up on a lot of, or on your website, excuse me, that's going to show up on a lot of different pages. You load it, you maybe like it's going to show up on every product you use. Or it's going to show up on every, I don't know, you want on your left sidebar maybe to be a list of recent content. Like that would be a block in Drupal parlance. So I'm going to start using an example here. If you imagine a website for a fruit stand, this guy just sells fruit. So my module might be fruit catalog because it does a whole bunch of different things. It sort of gives me an opportunity to kind of organize my fruit and give simple descriptions about my fruit and do stuff like that. So that's sort of your general site building jargon. Now we get to my favorite slide of the whole thing. It's not a particularly good slide. It's not necessarily going to do everything I want it to do, but if I had one slide that I could get everyone in this room to be like, I get this slide, it will be this one. And then I'm sure that I'm going to get, the first question I'm expecting is like, why is your most important slide all text? And well, I don't know, it was late by the time I got to the slide. So basically, web pages are dead, long live web content. So I was talking about that idea of blocks. What you need to start doing is stop thinking in terms of a page when you're structuring your content, when you're thinking of something, because your content lives on lots of different pages. And not only does it live on lots of different pages, it lives in lots of different places, on different platforms, on different systems. Like, often your website is going to maybe be serving some information, but a lot of the time you're going to want not just your website to show it. You might have a mobile app that also wants to display some of the same information, or you might be saying, website, I want you to go pull this from my production database to show this information to my clients, because I don't want to expose my whole production database to my client, but I do want them to get some simple updates of where their project is at. You know, so stuff like this. And so you have to understand that when you're thinking about a website, you're not thinking about, well, I got my 4 web pages. At least not when you start building a website of any size. You have to start thinking of it in terms of, I am building something that is going to manage my content. There's that content management system again. And so that's why I think this slide is really important. So the jargon that Drupal uses for this stuff, content, I just pretty thoroughly covered that. A content type is a category of content. And a node is a piece of content. So that's probably best explained by going back to the fruit stand example. My content type is fruit. That means that everything that is a fruit is going to be a node. So like an apple is going to be a node. I have a node for orange. I have a node for watermelon, for pomegranate, for like whatever fruits I happen to sell. And so my content type is fruit because all of these different nodes are fruits. And we can say some stuff about fruit. So again, because this slide is so important, the good thing is I didn't have to do all the heavy lifting myself. There's this other presentation. And if you don't get this, or if you're really jazzed about this, I would definitely recommend that you go to this. Barry's a great presenter. He works with Advantage Labs, and they do a lot of teaching. And he does a lot of teaching, so he's a good speaker. Go listen to him. Well, I said I liked it, and I said there was one slide you should get, but actually there's two. Advanced content jargon. This is where we start to get a little bit more specific for Drupal. Field is an attribute or property of a content type. Taxonomy term is a categorization, so it's sort of like a grouping of your nodes. View is a way of displaying many related nodes at the same time. And again, there's actually lots of other things that views can do for you. Views is a specific module. Unlike most of the rest of these things, views is a specific module. You can write that down if you want. Otherwise, I can explain it a little bit more. Going back to our example. So remember, my content type is fruit. My nodes are apple, watermelon, orange, etc. My fields might be color, because all my fruits are going to have a color. Like my apple is going to be red. My orange is going to be orange. My lime is going to be green. My taxonomy terms are going to be things like citrus, because while it's correct to say it's a fruit, it's also more specific and in many ways more interesting to me if I say this is a citrus. So like, and in citrus, so I would be organizing my different pieces of content in these groupings. So this is going to mean things in citrus, you know, might encapsulate limes, pineapples, grapefruits, etc. This on its own is not that important until you get to views. And views is where it really starts to shine. Because you can, it used to be, the people who are developers here, who don't know Drupal, will look at the statement and they'll be like, I know what this is. You're just telling me a fancy way to do SQL. And you're right, I am. I'm also telling you a really fast, really powerful, really impressive way to do SQL. If that didn't make sense to you, you can ask later. But what I want is, so if that didn't make sense to you, what I want you to take away is that it's really easy for me to say, give me the names of all citrus fruits that are yellow or green, and then immediately get lemon, lime, pineapple, and maybe some others. And that, it's just really powerful. And that probably more than anything is what convinced me that, hey, Drupal's pretty great, because SQL's fine. But I like being able to do other stuff really quickly and be able to roll out really nice, really good pages without having to worry that much about it. All right, so then on to user jargon. So user, yeah, I thought actually for a while before I settled on this kind of half-baked definition. A user is a person who uses the site. Wow, yeah, that's revolutionary, isn't it? A role is a way of categorizing your users. And a permission is basically grants an ability to all users who are in a role, who have a role. So what this means a lot of the times is you often, like frequently use roles or something like content editor, who maybe can approve content and can write content. You know, your admin who gets to do lots of stuff. And then there are two baked in roles. Anonymous user is any user who isn't logged in. Simple enough. An administrator is a role that has the ability to do anything by default. And so you can set one particular role. You can actually change that. It does not have to be named administrator. That's just a very common one. And so when you install a new module, that means you don't have to say, I gotta go to the permissions page, and I gotta go tell Drupal that the administrators have to be able to do that, because it's really frustrating to install your new module and be like, man, I can't wait to check it out. Access denied. So anyway, administrator is one really handy role. Going back to our fruit stand example, so like one user role might be my farmer. I'm a fruit stand owner. I want my farmers to be able to log into my site, and I want them to be able to do some very specific stuff. A specific user would be like Farmer Green. Farmer Green's awesome. He's like, I don't know, out in Wisconsin somewhere growing lots of great fruit for me. So he's my user. My user role is Farmer because there's Farmer Green and Farmer Jones and Farmer, lots of people. Permissions is something for like the Farmer user would be like, list this fruit as something I grow. So maybe I log into the site and I want to be able to quickly access all the fruits that I grow if I'm a farmer. And then I can do something like, well, I grow cherries, and I grow raspberries, and I grow apples, and so those are what I'm going to do. And maybe there's some special reason, I'm starting to stretch the limits of this example, but maybe there's some special reason that I'd want to be able to access those really quickly without having to search through the general user interface. And then there are something else like rate tastiness of this fruit. And that may be something I want everybody to do because I'm leveraging the social web, and so I want all my anonymous users to say, hey, I really like apples. Apples are a 5-star fruit or something. And so that's another example of a permission. And so that is the end of the prepared stuff that I have for you. I did say in my description that there would be an extended question and answer session, and this is where we get to it. If you want more information, especially on the Drupal stuff, I would recommend you check out this link. There's a lot of great stuff there, much of it in much more depth than I talked about it. And it really is when you're like, especially you go to a README and the file says, well, obviously it does this. And you're like, I know half the words in that sentence. This is where you're going to find out, you're going to get at least something out of it. And that's it. Thank you. So, questions? I have a mic here, and if you speak into the mic, I don't have to repeat your question, which will bore both of us.
Is this working? Would every node necessarily have its own unique URL?
Well, the technical answer is yes. The answer from a user's perspective is not necessarily. So, a lot of the time with views, I can actually, it might not be appropriate. I might want to, because if you can imagine like a list of products maybe, I may not have enough information about any given product to make it really viable as its own individual web page. But I might want to say, give sort of a short description of the product, and that's all the far that I'm going to want to do. So yes, in the back end, there is a page for that product, but you can actually engineer your site so that the user never necessarily sees it. So, kind of.
So my background is SEO, and so a lot of the times I'm not just looking at the content on the page, we're looking at the URLs because we may want to point to them or share them in a marketing piece or something.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to deprogram myself from calling everything a page, but I still look at URLs and treat them as essentially pages, which is why I asked.
Yes. One of the ways that we've tackled that problem is to use 301 redirects for that page, so you can still get to it. Or to use other kinds of redirects, basically. So it'll still sort of be listed, and it can be indexed. Well, I think, okay, this is starting to stretch my limits of SEO understanding, but you can actually still make it that it will be understood, and any links to it will still can still work, but it will actually go to maybe your listing page. And to be fair, in something like that, you probably would not want to you probably would not want to structure your strategy around directing to that particular node. You'd probably want to say maybe this product group is what I want to start structuring my SEO strategy around. I don't want to necessarily say especially if you can imagine a business for whom they have to call up. They're not necessarily doing e-commerce, they just want to call, and they want to say well, I want to be listed as a really big thing in the industry of X, and so maybe here's a few of my product lines. Maybe what you want to do is think of from an SEO standpoint, my product line is sort of my core kind of pages where I want to direct to. My products, however, will still be nodes in the background. They just won't necessarily be that. Okay.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about taxonomy and just how, when you're doing data modeling and you're thinking about how to include information about content type, what do you think about when you're trying to decide whether data should be included in the content type or whether you would break it out into taxonomy
Sure.
in the site?
Well, the short answer is it's complicated, which is probably not the answer you want to hear. So what I tend to do, the sort of way that I like to do it, is I like to start at what one or two or three, usually, sometimes getting into larger sites is more, like facets of this company are the most important thing to show to my users. Like almost, it's not quite what's the deepest they want to drill down, but maybe what's the deepest they want to drill down at a basic level, you know? So when I'm thinking about a particular taxing question that often, a question that comes up is what's a taxonomy, what's ideal for a taxonomy term and what's ideal for a field. So like and there's actually a lot of different ways to slice data, further complicating the question. So like going back to the fruit stand analogy, I say, well, what is my fruit stand most interested in? Well, probably fruit. And it doesn't mean that I have to draw the line there. It just means that I kind of chose to do so. Like I actually considered during this presentation, like should I say like an individual piece of fruit is a node? Like this apple is a node, and this apple is a node, and this apple is a node, and this apple is a node. And the short answer is if you have a client with a big budget that really wants to track something to that level, that might be appropriate. And so it's almost more of an art than a science, and it's something that you have to try a little bit. The good news is Drupal makes it pretty easy to prototype things and roll them out pretty quickly, and also to undo them. So when in doubt, try it, see if you can do it. So the second part of your question, which I didn't really address that well, is like taxonomy specifically. So taxonomy is a way of categorizing things, and it makes a lot of things, it makes interlinking things pretty easy. So like if I have, so it's like you can, going back again to the fruit stand example, if I have citrus, it's actually often very, like let's say I'm looking for a pie recipe for lemon meringue pie, and I want to try to use a different, I want to try, you know, lime meringue pie. I don't know if that'd be good, but it might be. You can imagine that if I happen to be on this vendor's page, I might want to know, I might want to be able to really easily see like, well, I don't have any lemons around. Maybe I have some of these other citrus fruits around or something. And so it would be very useful for me to be able to kind of cross-link these pages very easily. It's not that you can't do it with a field. You definitely can. It's a little harder, and it doesn't quite offer some of the same out-of-the-box tools, I guess is the best way of putting it. Does that answer your question? Okay. I'll give you the mic in 1 second. Thank you.
I think you just gave me my money's worth. I just got an aha I've been looking for.
Oh, good.
So is the node the smallest granularity that you can apply taxonomy to? Because if I'm hearing right, basically, to use another content management system as an example, in WordPress, posts and pages are nodes.
Yes, well, okay, I'm not super familiar with WordPress. Okay. So answer the second part of the question first. I think so. Posts would definitely be nodes. Pages, I'm a little bit less clear on.
Oh my God, that's really exciting.
So, good, I'm glad. And then, so, I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question again?
Is the node,
is the node the smallest piece?
My difficulty is I've got a client that wants to publish books. I could make each book a node, but now how do we break that content up? So yeah, it's content slicing becomes the issue.
It's usually the smallest point. Like, as far as what you could apply a tax, I mean, theoretically, no. I don't know. I think you can, so there's this idea, which I didn't get that much into, that you could push it further In most cases, the node is going to be that.
But you could customize trying to use the right word, not a module. I could do a custom that could.
Yes, exactly. There's something called the entity system, which actually is sort of a wrapper around a node. So if you want some pieces of node functionality, but you don't want all pieces of node functionality, you could theoretically write something that sort of extends it even further down the tree, so the node is somewhere up there. Most use cases, though, the node is probably, it's not indivisible. So it's the smallest piece of content, but it's not indivisible because there are fields. So it's not like, here's my blob of content, but there are fields inside it, because like that way I can say really easily, like, I want to get my colors, I want to get my names, I want to get my weights, I want to get whatever else about my fruit, so that I don't have to, like, I don't want to see the big description. I don't want to know that apples are great in pie, but I do want to know that they're red.
So really that SQL analogy is a very good one. If we think about cells and rows and tables.
A lot of the time, yes.
Awesome. But I don't have to.
You don't have to, yes, you do not have to.
See, I came here to try to figure out how to tell people why Drupal is strong. And now I've got that answer. More importantly, though, do you have with you today any sparkly Drupalized stickers? Drupalized me stickers?
No, I don't work for Drupalized me. Is anybody from them here? Do you guys know Allie? Or I don't know. I don't know. I don't know who that is.
I just know they're rare and desirable.
Yeah, I got mine. I got mine in where did I go to Chicago at DrupalCon a couple of years ago. So yeah, they're a collector's item, I guess. I didn't know that actually. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Anybody else?
I maintain a Drupal site. It's 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to understand how it works since I'm not a developer. When I want to add some new content, I have different content types I can choose from, and one of them is a page. So I'm hearing you talk about don't think of it in terms of pages, but I do have that option, and within that, on most of the pages, I guess, I have the option to add a photo, I can add a download. So those are different content types somehow integrated into this page, and I don't understand how that works.
Almost. So those other things, so first of all, why is it called a page? Well, it's called a page a lot for historical reasons, because Drupal thought in pages for a long time too. And it's kind of getting over its page hangover, and you still kind of see remnants of it around. So it's called a page. A lot of the time for that particular content type, which is, I think it's a default one, I'm pretty sure. I think they might have changed it to article in 7, I don't quite recall. But so for that one, it really is kind of designed to be mostly a page, which is why they call it a page. With that, though, getting to the second part of your question, which is like, what are these other things I'm seeing? Those are fields. So field doesn't necessarily even have to be like an attribute. It doesn't have to be a color. It can be a file. It can be an image. And you can have multiples of one field, of one type of thing. This is why you can say, like, I want to attach not one image, but like 40 images, 1,000 images, all to the same node. And so that's why, that's basically what those are. And it's not crystal clear, because some of the time these things are going to seem like they're nodes, but they're fields, and sometimes they're going to seem like they're fields, but they're actually just pointers to other nodes. Sorry, I wish I could make it clearer than that, but that's kind of the basic idea. Does that answer your question?
More or less, so I can see being one of those people on your learning curve, jumping off.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for coming. I do actually. It's really good when we get people who are not hardcore Drupal people who decide to come to these. So thank you. Question?
Actually, it's just off of your question. DrupalCon, one of the keynotes was about
at DrupalCon Portland, one of the keynotes was specifically about pages and not pages, and why people are moving out of pages, and it really kind of like, a lot of light bulbs went off for me. So it's on the DrupalCon Portland website, which
This is Karen
McGrain's keynote. So if that, you might watch that. It's pretty non-technical and just really explains the concepts of what a page is. Her name is Karen McGrain. Her last name is McGrane. And it was at DrupalCon Portland, which I don't know the URL for, but if you Google her name and the conference name, it'll come up, and they have video of it.
Yes, Jeff Eaton also is giving a keynote on something very similar.
Maybe a little easier than finding it on Google.
Oh, I'll just repeat your question because it's hard to get up there.
The intro to content types session this afternoon.
Yeah, did I?
We're going to parse a lot of this idea in relating it to content types.
Yes.
We're going to go as deep to try to give you some aha moments about that first.
Great. Well, so it's not so important to get this on the recording, but for posterity. Barry just told me that there's that session that I mentioned. He's going to talk a lot more about a lot of this same stuff of these last two questions. So, more questions? Sure.
Is this concept of not thinking of it in terms of web pages and more about content mostly a Drupal thing? Or, I mean, are you seeing other platforms pushing to this, or is this just because Drupal is structured the way it's structured, and so Drupal is more interested in getting people to not think about web pages? Because, you know, like
Sure.
WordPress, for example, other platforms, they still call them pages.
Right. I think, well, it kind of grows out of, again, the sort of Drupal wants to be flexible. And so this has actually been happening for a long time. It's just been happening on a lot of sites that everybody knows and uses. Like Amazon, you'll notice that Amazon doesn't just have its price on one page. Can you imagine the tedium that Amazon would go through if they had to change their price on every single page their item was listed on? You know how like when you look at Amazon, it says like, people who looked at this item frequently bought, and you're like, what the heck is that? It still shows you a price, you know, like it's a price there. And Amazon does not have millions of monkeys on typewriters like putting these prices in. Amazon just changes that price once. Well, probably, you know, we're talking gigantic company. Probably changes it like 5 times, but it's easy because they're Amazon. And it replicates through the whole site. And so it's not like Drupal invented it. I would love to claim that, but I can't. Drupal just sort of said, hey, that's a really good idea, and has been a little bit faster maybe than some of the other content management systems about adopting it. So, other questions?
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're defining the content types in the nodes and things like that, are you defining those inside of the admin interface, or are you defining those like in files?
Yes. You can do it either way. Usually it's done, so this gets a little bit farther down the rabbit hole, but basically you can do it most of the time through the admin interface. You can, if you wish, define them through code. A lot of, particularly if you're managing multiple Drupal sites and you're writing something that you want to use on a lot of your client sites maybe, you will maybe start out by creating it in the admin interface and then export it to code so that you can easily replicate it from piece to piece. I would say that it's probably faster usually to use the admin interface, but code does open up possibilities that the admin interface does not, either makes really hard or just plain doesn't offer.
So in terms of like creating an environment that you could use Git or some other versioning, you would probably want to use code so that you could get that up? Or?
So, okay. So you guys all got Drupal 7 now, right? Well, Drupal 8 is coming out and it's going to change a lot of this stuff. But I'll stick to Drupal 7 for right now. So there's of course a lot of settings. One of Drupal's big, both benefits and weakness is that it stores a lot of things in the database. It's a benefit because it makes it really easy to do checkbox and to really configure things without having to do code. If you're a non-technical user, you can manage your site all right. Like if you don't know the first thing about PHP, you can still do it. That's the good thing about it. The bad thing about it is it doesn't work with Git. It doesn't work, Git, version control, is basically something that says, I want to track every single change I make to every single file on my project ever. And for a lot of complicated reasons, databases don't work well with that. And so, yes, that's a drawback to it. They are changing this actually in Drupal 8 so that most of your configuration is actually going to be exported as files automatically. So you check it, it gets exported to a file. Like you check the checkbox, you say save, it's going to get exported as a file. That said, you need to build a Drupal site now. Don't use 8. Don't use 8 until it's officially released at least. Unless you are like, you know, I'm going to love me some Drupal or something. Don't use 8. So. Be there in a second.
You mentioned in the site jargon section going down that list. And if this is going too far down the rabbit hole, then just send me away. But you mentioned the custom area. It's a modular theme that's written specifically for one site and isn't meant to be reused elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
How is that, when something like that is developed, how is that administered? I also am currently running a Drupal 6 site, and we do have some custom code that was developed. In the administrative interface that I'm using, I can see modules and I can see the listing in there, but it's not like in 7 where I can go in and start configuring them.
Mm-hmm.
How is that typically done?
The short answer is if it's done well. If it's done well for a client that wants it or for a site that needs it, it should still be able to be managed through the admin interface. That said, budget, real-world considerations come in. Sometimes it doesn't get done. So actually, the difference that you're probably seeing between Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 is probably more of a, well, there's two things coming in. One is that Drupal 7 makes it a little bit easier to see when you can configure a module. But the second thing is it's probably just that they were written slightly differently. And maybe the Drupal 6 version just didn't expose that stuff. Because they're like, you know what? I'm going to write a custom module, and I'm expecting that the people who are going to have to use this module in the future will always know, or will be able to go back to this. That's, I mean, when the rubber hits the road, that's sometimes the trade-offs that get made. You know, I'd love it, but it doesn't. It's not a theoretical limitation. It's a real-world limitation. So, you had a question?
And I don't know if it's so much a question as if maybe you could do a kind of a summary using your fruit stand example. So we've got the fruits, Paul's fruit stand, and
Yes.
one of the content types could be fruit.
Yes.
Now, using your jargon for the content, can you just kind of start at the beginning? You know, kind of how does that flow down? Where does the node fit? Where does the field fit? Where does the content type fit, and all that?
Sure. So I guess if I was building the site, if I was building the fruit stand site, I would start out by creating myself a content type that was fruit. And after I built the content type, I would start adding fields to this content type. Because I'd say, well, what do I want to know about fruit? I want to know what its color is. I want to know how it's used. I want to know a brief description of it. So that would be what I'd do. But notice yet, I'm not putting anything specifically about my fruits yet. I'm still defining a structure into which I'm going to put my fruits. This is also the time at which I'd say, well, I want to have the ability to categorize my fruits. You know, like I want to be able to group my fruits together. I'm not saying it's citrus yet, but I'm giving myself the ability to later define something that's citrus. The next thing, and then with that, you know, so there's a lot of power in these fields, as you have figured out, so I can do things like I want to attach really pretty pictures of my fruit to my content type. So I'm not attaching my pictures yet. I'm just saying I want to be able to do so. I want to be able to attach files because, you know, I'm in sales, right? So I want to know like full pricing or whatever of my fruit, and I only want me to be able to see that. So I do that. Then what I would do next, after I have all of that kind of stuff done, is I would start actually adding my fruit. I don't have to do it that way. That's just the easiest way to do it, and that's sort of the best way to do it, because that means that I don't do something like, well, I'm going to add an apple. Oops, I need to add a color. Okay, go back, add a color field, then go back and say my apple is red. You know, it's just, that's more of a step-saving process than anything. So that's like the basics of it. Once I was done with that, that's basically the content modeling part of it. Then I would probably start throwing on things. Also, I should clarify, that particular example doesn't necessarily have to use any modules. That stuff that I was talking about mostly is pre-baked in. I can package some of this stuff into a module if I want to, so that I can easily take it from this site and use it in another site. But it doesn't necessarily have to use a module. So that's why it seems like I skipped that step, that's why. So then after I get that part done, that's probably when I start saying like, well, what do I want my different users to do? Like what is a user for my website? Like in the examples that I was using was like a farmer, an anonymous user who just gets to rate stuff. Maybe I want to have a moderator who says, you know, I can allow lots of people to make changes. Like anybody who's logged into the site can change it, but it doesn't get published, it doesn't get shown to anybody until my moderator says, go ahead and publish that. So maybe my moderator would be a role. So I would define those roles and I would say, well, like, what does the moderator need to do? Particularly as relevant to the fruit, but also like in the wider context of my site. Well, a moderator needs to be able to do these very specific like publishing tasks with my fruit. And a farmer needs to be able to say, hey, this is the kind of fruit I grow, right? Like he needs to sort of add it to his profile or something like that. And that's the basic outline. There's an awful lot of hand waving, but that's basically it. Does that answer it well enough?
Yeah, that helps.
More questions?
I have a question about how a search feature would look with building fields and taxonomies. I work at a university with professors, and there's lots of different general categories of what they teach, their field, but then they all have very specific, unique specializations. So would a search feature have to list out every specialization, or would it be able to gather like related things if they don't? Would it be typing in and then identifying people that's close but not exactly what they type, or is it just going to be a long list of all these unique specializations?
It depends. So a lot of that, some of what you're talking about is how you decide to implement specifically your search. Some of what you're talking about is specifically how you decide to implement your categorization. And some of it is how you're going to implement your actual entry of the terms into the system. Okay? So I guess there's three different types. The first one I'm going to dodge because it's really hard. But basically there are some modules out there. You might want to look into the Solar module. That's the one that I use probably most frequently for that kind of thing. That basically allows some really rich searching. Drupal's default search engine, okay. Solar is what you use to get it like really good if you want more than just kind of a really loose search. The second part of your question is related to how you actually design the content or the text. Usually, what you're talking about is going to be a taxonomy. Once you start talking about things where you want to say, I want to relate a term to another term, or I want to start, you know, kind of making a little bit, almost more of like a web than necessarily like a strict listing of terms, that's when you probably want to start looking into taxonomy. You may even want to take the next step and make your taxonomy a full-blown content type so that it's actually just going to be content references and so they can freely reference each other. You can do that, I think, actually also with taxonomy. But that's also a possibility. Making it a node opens up some even further options beyond just taxonomy. The third one is the widget question, which is like, how do you actually put these things in there? So like you could straight up dump it into your SQL database or import it somehow into Drupal. You could do it that way. That obviously becomes really hard if you want to start managing things like relations between terms. But you can also do, like, if it's a little bit more ad hoc, you can do something where, you know, people enter in like comma-separated lists. And then you can do simple things like with some modules, you can do things like check for spelling errors, consistency, and stuff like that. You can dump out a big old select list to like to say like this teacher is in the St. Thomas University of University of Law, like I don't know, patent department, you know, and this other, but he also sometimes teaches in the public policy department. So maybe you can make it a big old list if you want. Obviously, that's going to be a question of how many terms do you have, how complex are they, and what's kind of appropriate. So that's the basics of it. Does that answer your question? Okay. Other questions?
I have one more, and this is very basic, so I apologize to all of you who roll your eyes when I ask this. But I just heard you talk about site building steps and how you need to think about your content, you need to think about your users and roles.
Mm-hmm.
If you were going to build a site from scratch and you were going to just briefly describe what your steps are. I'm asking this in this session because it will be filled with jargon. So how would you, to a boss who wanted to know, okay, what will this involve? Could you just very briefly, I want to hear the words you would use to say what this involves.
Sure. Well, this goes back kind of to the earlier question of how do you slice your content, first of all. So the first thing that I would need to do is I need to gather something. Like, what is the sort of core business that my client or that, you know, my boss or whoever I happen to be developing the site for, what is the core business kind of what that they have? And usually once I identify what that is, I try to figure out how I can make that into a node, like or several different kinds of nodes, in a way that makes sense. And then I try to drive as much as possible away from the jargon running and screaming when I'm talking to somebody who doesn't know it. So I guess what I would say in that context, so like going to the fruit stand example, I'm making this for somebody, this is not Paul's fruit stand. This is John Q. Executive's fruit stand. And John Q. Executive just knows he wants a fruit stand. And so what I would say is like, okay, well, you have a lot of types of fruit. And so we need to make sure that and you want to tell people all kinds of stuff about your fruit. And I basically just try to hammer on the like sort of basic node types, content types, without calling them content types, without trying to say like fields. I try to talk about it in terms that make as much sense as possible. And I try to talk about, like, I try to think when I'm saying something, and I will in fact even just like start realizing I'm doing a terrible job, say, okay, hang on a minute, let me think about this, take like 3 seconds, 4 seconds to just kind of reformulate my thought, start my sentence over, and try to rip out all the jargon. Again, it's hard to do, but so like in the fruit stand example, I think what I'd try to say something like, so you are really good at selling fruit, and you want people to know that you're really good at selling fruit, and you really want them to be able to find out a lot of things about your fruit. You want them to be able to easily find the kinds of fruit that they're looking for, and you want them to be able to, I figure out some way, I guess, to put in the rating of fruit, you know, like, or where it's being grown, maybe. You want that stuff to be exposed to your users, or to be available to people who are visiting your site. And so in that case, I try to say like, the executive, people at the executive level are going to be really good at latching on to what their core what their sort of core high level thinking is. And so I try to, like, as much as possible, put it in terms of their business and their way of talking and not think about it in my way of talking. It's hard. I wish I could say I was perfect at it. I'm not, but that's what I try to do.
Could I rephrase my question just a little bit? I think you answered what I probably said, but if I was describing the steps, and I'm making this up, I don't know, but I would say, first I'm going to figure out what content types, who's going to be using this, what all we have, and then I need to install a core Drupal installation and need to choose a theme, and then I start building my pages. Is that sort of it, or where did my jargon go wrong on that?
I think that's accurate enough. I think what I would say, it sort of depends on the person, you know? Like if you're talking to a CTO, it's different than a CEO. So I think I would probably say, like, I would tend to coach it. I would start at the highest level, wait until their eyes glaze over, and then stop. So at the highest level, I would probably say something like, well, first we're going to do a discovery phase. I'm going to learn about your business. I'm going to figure out, like, what I need to know to sort of, like, wrap my head, because you know a lot about what you do, and I don't, at least not yet. I want to get to know a lot about what you do so that I can build you a great website, but I don't yet. And so I'd start at that, and then I'd probably say, like, and then we're going to build it. I'd probably leave it as simple as, we're going to build it. And if they seem completely uninterested in that step, that's as far as I go. And then I say, like, you know, maybe we go back to the discovery phase and do some more stuff, depending upon what your development workflow is. And then we're going to build something new, like a little smaller piece. And then we're going to go back to planning and build something new, or whatever. If they want to go a little bit farther in depth, I would probably say something like, well, we're going to use Drupal 7. We're going to install, like, we're going to install a bunch of contributed modules. We're going to figure out what we need to actually, how we need to model our content. Then I'm going to start building that out. And I would, at this point, because it's Drupal and because I'm a very big proponent in the content first model, I would start trying to sell them on the idea of a content model. And then from there, I would probably try to leave most of the technical details behind the curtain, unless they asked about it. Like if they specifically want to know, if they've done a bunch of research on Drupal and they want to know, like, what modules I'm using, then I'd probably tell them. So that's basically it. Well, I think we're out of time. Thank you guys very much for this. And if you want to, feel free to grab me in the hall or something, and I would be happy to answer further questions. Thank you.